All right. Can you hear me? There we go. All right. So, hi, my name is Ruth Magyar, and I am a program manager on the Fast Track for Azure program. We are in the customer experience team in the Azure engineering. And our primary objective is to do exactly what he just mentioned for all of the getting started. We work with customers to help onboard onto our platform. Our primary objective is customer success and enabling our customers to figure out their identity strategy and their networking strategy and get those things set up so that they can modernize their applications on the Azure platform. Our secondary objective is to continuously provide feedback to the Azure engineering teams that own the services so that we are continuously improving our platform. And so we have tonight a conversation around Azure migrations with Anthony de Lagarde, one of our engineers on the team, and Jeff Butte, who's also on the Azure engineering team, to talk about how we work with customers and what customers go through for the Azure migration and recovery journey. And with that, hand it over.
I promise you this is not going to be a presidential debate. All right. How's everybody feeling tonight? Good pizza? Good wine? There you go. All right. So while my colleague and good friend Jeff Butte is getting together, my name is Anthony de Lagarde. I'm a principal fast track engineer. I work within the Azure CXP team. Ruth is my program manager. And we work both in federal and as well as in commercial. So we are pretty much like an extension. When you buy the product, guess what? Get the product. I know we're not a sales thing, but just letting you know, we come with the product right there. All right, are we ready?
I think we are.
And so I just introduced myself. Jeff, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi there, Jeff Butte. I'm with the Azure Global Government team. So I'm actually one of the teams that's in between the fast track environment and the actual product teams. So I'm one of the people that I don't actually spend time with the customers anymore from a delivery perspective. I spend time looking for things like gaps in the product, white space that we have not looked to move into, or if there's a part of the product where we say it does something but it may not exactly do exactly what we believe it will, taking that feedback back to the engineers and being able to refactor that product and get it back out into working order.
So in other words, you are probably our most important asset, not only using our product, but also giving us feedback and giving us ideas of how we can extend the platform to support your needs. So please. All right, so tonight we're going to talk about Azure Migrate. We had a great speaker just earlier talking about, hey, this is how you would do a journey to the cloud. But let me ask you a question. How many times have you been with somebody or an organization, they're very excited to go to the cloud, they're very gung-ho, but they don't exactly know how to orchestrate it? Has that ever happened? Okay, so Jeff, out of curiosity, what are some of the things that Azure Migrate does and helps our organization do to get started in the cloud?
So the first thing is Azure Migrate. It makes it sound as if it migrates you. We're not the best at our naming conventions and everything out there. So Azure Migrate, what it does, it assists you by assessing the environment to be able to do a migration. So it's an agentless process to be able to go out and look at your environment, assess it, and then be able to help you determine those things of, is a system ideal for migration or is it not? Now, it may not be able to do everything from an assessment perspective, but it's basically taken a lot of the feedback that's come in from the fast track teams, from partners, from our own services team out there to look at what things would basically key on and say, hey, this is not a good fit for a migration, or here are the things you need to adjust prior to doing a migration.
So, go ahead.
Do you assess training and competency of the folks? Because you want to migrate, but you don't have the necessary trained people that can do execution.
So that's a fantastic point you just made right there, but this doesn't do that. Okay.
That's the biggest problem. I talk about agencies and one of the biggest challenges. They don't know the cloud. They get this analysis, and they're so confused all different services, and then it goes nowhere until later.
Let me ask you a question. If we had a program that actually helped you get certified and trained, would you be happy, interested about that?
We went through it, and a lot of people have got certified. You had the infrastructure boot camp free a couple years ago, so
Sure.
we actually went through it. But I talked to a lot of other agencies, and they're having problems in that area because they don't have the training. So they get this great information, but they can't act on it because they don't understand it.
Okay, so that's one of the things.
So I would make sure that's part of your, if it's not part of your program, to make it sure it is.
All right. So in this case, this particular product and feature right here doesn't address that, but that's good feedback.
Yeah.
What this here is, what I'd
key.
say is, I saw that. So what this really does is, think about this here. If I'm a project manager or I'm a business owner and I want to make the business case to take my applications to Azure, this starts giving me the foundation and information to start talking with the business, also figuring out with my tech what are the systems that can go there, what's the cost, and most importantly, what's ready to go, and what do I have to refactor.
But what we found, I'll just tell you from experience,
Sure.
it's a lot of money in the training to get everybody trained, the whole staff trained, on-site training, the numerous classes, the PowerShell, the Azure automation, things like that. If you don't count for that up front and you try to do it midway, the migration stops because
Sure.
they don't understand it, they have problems, and then they're calling Microsoft for help. Why didn't it go well?
So one thing also I can add, everything you said is exactly, I'm on point, we'll not dispute that right there. One thing also that Ruth Magyar, after this we could probably talk about it, during the Azure program, Azure Fast Track, part of our engagements when we help you migrate, those type of trainings and over-shoulder knowledge transfers and execution are participated with the program to help accelerate with confidence to the cloud.
Well, you guys have the SA benefits, and we use a lot of the free classes on site for the Microsoft Premier or Opsgility or other partners to do the training. So
Okay.
just FYI.
No, I appreciate it. It's great feedback. I do appreciate it. And if actually, what's your name?
Mike.
All right, Mike, we'll see you later. Okay. Cut it out.
It's one of the things I see.
No, it's good. No, it's good. It basically, you need more horses, less chiefs. You just need somebody to do the actual work. Understood. We got that. Okay, so with that said, Mr. Jeff, get this back on track.
All right. Okay, so tonight we're basically going to talk about Azure Migrate itself. So it's the actual application that comes down and does the assessment. For the demo, there's a myriad of different ways to be able to go and migrate different workloads, especially if you're going to be doing a lift and shift. The first thing you need to do is assess what are the environments that you're going to be able to pull in. We have a vast array of documentation that kind of walks you through what things are good fits, what are not. Good example, many applications out there, they have a native inbox capability for being able to do data moves. So for example, Active Directory. There's no need to do a lift and shift migration of a domain controller. It's a multi-master replication. You stand up a new one, it just replicates there. But let's say you have an application for which you may not have a lot of information around. The people that built it, they may not still be, working at the company. You may not have a good solid code base.
Does that actually happen?
Never. The code base may be, missing. It's where are the instructions of how to install it? What do I do with it? Those are great examples if you're having to do something like a data center closure, a data center migration. If you're, running out of power, space, and cooling, and it's a low-use application, you want to basically move it someplace, but you haven't got the time to be able to do a refactor. Azure Migrate is definitely a good way to do it.
So one thing I'd point out right here, to Jeff's point, everything he said was spot on. What this is basically risk mitigation and upfront research that you need to know, A, what's going to cost me, what's the relationships of the machines and the systems. A lot of times people get up after years of being here, nursing those systems, they leave. Institutional knowledge is not there anymore. But most importantly, it helps you figure out anything that's going on that the business wants to know and understand before they actually make that commitment. And this helps you orchestrate in a very calculated manner how to get the data in up front to take it either to a partner, Microsoft, or one of your consultants that you work with currently. Okay? So, out of curiosity, Jeff, why don't you walk me through this right here in the crowd? So I see 3 different tracks right here in this journey. Let's go through all this right now.
All right, so the first thing we need to do is discover what your environment consists of. For the purpose of a demo, like I said, there's a myriad of different ways you can do this. For the demo purpose, a lot of our customers out there, they've got existing VMware infrastructure, so we're actually going to walk through doing discovery of a VMware infrastructure. The next thing we have to do is, after we've done the discovery, we have to be able to do a migration of that to the cloud. And then the last thing is optimizing it. On-prem, it may have been a monster machine. It may have had very low utilization. During the process of migration, we may be able to right-size it and route there. But even then, if we don't have enough information, we can always right-size it once it gets there.
Okay, awesome. So let's go to the next page. All right, so what we're going to do is go through an actual demo and a walkthrough and how this works right here. And the most important thing right here is you don't really need to have, let's say, everybody who's an IT pro or some type of professional, you don't necessarily need to have high requirements or knowledge. To the gentleman's point right here, do I need to be a PhD in how to set this up? No, it's not designed. It's designed to be something fast, fluid, so once you set it up, get up and leave and do other work that you have to do and let it run for some time, maybe 30 days, get some information about your environment. The goal is you want to start getting your environment inventoried so that you have a good use case and a business case moving forward to understand how you move forward towards cloud. All right, with that said, what do we have right here?
Okay, so we have two things we're going to walk through. One is our VMware environment. So for the purpose of this, we just got a very simple environment, just a standard vCenter, a web application running Windows, and a LAMP stack sitting on Linux. So when it comes to migration to the cloud, there are many things you have to go through and make that determination. What's a good fit, what's not? For the most part, first, does it run in Azure? So there are certain things you cannot migrate. If it happens to be running a non-supported platform, right out of the gate, that's not going to migrate. But in most of our customer space, we find that a lot of them are running in the VMware environment, and for the most part, anything that's running within VMware is likely going to be a good candidate for migration. Anything that's a supported operating system. So to be able to do a migration, the first thing we need to do is actually set up a migration project. Consists of going out and creating a resource. So we're going to look at.
Hey, Jeff. Screen.
Whoop. Let me bring that across. There we go.
Cool.
Thank you. Well, that didn't help either.
Okay.
Come on.
While he's doing that right there, most of you, are you currently in a migration right now, leaving a data center, going to Azure, or considering it, or already done a move? Done? Okay. All right. And just quick show of hands while he gets this up and ready. How many of you are actually planning a migration right now? Okay, good. And were any of you aware of this tool? Okay. So, other thing also to in addition is, just so we're very clear, although Azure is a Microsoft product, how much would you say that there's actually a percentage of open source that's actually running on our platform? Anybody have an idea or a guess? Okay. No, a little lower. So I don't have the updated numbers, but last December when I was working with an open source project to get Red Hat on working with the team engineering on our platform, we were running about 47% of all workloads were open source. So you want to talk about heterogeneous, we're no longer basically just a Microsoft only environment. And we also support FreeBSD, my first OS. All right, how are we doing?
Okay, we're good.
All right.
Let's see. Step one, create an Azure Migrate project. And it's very simple. You go through, just select Azure Migrate from the gallery, and then click Create. In my case, I've already created one, so we're actually going to jump to the one that I've created. Run back to the dashboard. All right. Once you're in here, then it's a matter of going through the process to create the discovery. If you were to create the project, it's going to walk you through, for the first thing, before you get to this screen, it's just going to have a simple link for a download. And it's a download of an OVF file. In this case, if we're doing a VMware environment, it's an OVF file that you download and then you import into your VMware environment. So in my case, let me jump down here. AZ Migrate. So all it was a matter was just importing it, giving it a few basic information of your infrastructure. It's configured for DHCP, so for the most part, you can either assign it an IP address or just add it to your infrastructure and the system will boot up. And at that point, let me jump back to the presentation real quick, just to step through this quickly.
So this VM that we spin up, we have to just treat it like an appliance?
Pretty much as an
Correct.
appliance. You just download it, put it on your system. Literally just need a project manager and one IT pro, or just one IT pro to put it in there. And once you have The only thing you really need is basically have credentials to your VMware for the vMsphere, and once you have those credentials, log in, it automatically starts pulling the very same metrics that VMware does already, essentially from their console. Okay, how are we doing?
Looking to see if it has the.
Okay, so while he does that right there, and I don't know if I'm stealing your thunder while you do this.
Yep, go ahead.
So a couple things, right? This is what we call an agentless discovery. It pretty much goes in, taps into the credentials, gets information from the actual VMware database, pulls it out, and it starts basically just inventorying all the machines. Now, in the past, there was something we have. How many of you have used Azure Site Recovery, ASR? Okay. So ASR is still available, and that's still the primary tool of choice, but it's not the only tool. Also, in addition, letting you guys know, as we start moving forward with this particular product, there will be other hooks and APIs for third-party vendors like Zerto that can be used also to exercise migrations. Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay. One of the things that we wanted to talk about before we get into the actual Azure Migrate appliance is there are two ways to do an assessment. One of them is a deep discovery assessment, one's a light assessment. The deep discovery assessment, if anybody's worked with our Azure commercial environment, we have a product called Service Map. Service Map is an amazing product. It is something that, like many of our other services, are making it slowly into Azure Gov. As those get on-ramped and accredited, they'll be available. So it's a forthcoming service in Azure Gov, but I wanted to make you aware of it and what it does. From a impact to your environment perspective, this would be considered a heavy assessment because it requires an agent. The agent has to talk to the system, and what it does is it looks at all of the communications that your systems are experiencing and starts to create a map out of that. So it's looking at the network traffic, what ports and protocols are used, and then gives you a full-on visual, very similar to a Visio diagram view of your application. So when you go to migrate an application, you may not realize all of the things that it talks to. And so when it actually goes to the cloud, suddenly you may realize it has other things that should have accompanied it with it to the cloud, or that it may need to reach back on-prem. So to get your networking and everything working well, that assessment helps out a lot. But again, it's considered a heavy assessment because it does take some time to pull all that back in and then be able to do the mapping of everything. And so depending upon if it's a multi-tiered application, it'll basically map out, in this case, all of the ports and protocols for communication for all the different systems, and be able to give you a view of all your clients that are connecting, all the systems, all the authentication it's doing, and a nice view.
So the good thing about this also too is as you're starting looking for how to move your whole portfolio of applications, you may want to start figuring out which are the least dependency in terms of that communication, so that as I start moving something up into Azure, just like the gentleman said earlier in a previous conversation, I want to make sure that I don't necessarily break the whole back end of my app or have to decompose it to make it go up to Azure. Okay?
So for the light discovery, that's where we're using the VMware appliance. So for the most part, the only heavy part of it is the actual download of it and importing it into your VMware environment. But for the most part, all it's doing is pulling the metrics coming out of vCenter and piping that in and being able to get a view of your environment. So it's not agenting any of the machines, it's not actually touching any of them to do the assessment.
Hey, out of curiosity, so we're pulling the information from the VMs, but how are we taking that information and posting it back to Azure for analysis?
So as we go through the process, what it's doing is it goes out, it basically uses VMware as a collector, pulls the raw metadata in, and then pipes that back to the Azure Migrate service. So the portal that we provisioned out there is what we're connecting this appliance to, that feeds all of that data in to be able to provide you a visual of what your environment looks like from a Migrate assessment perspective.
And also, out of curiosity, is that encrypted?
It is.
Also, I'll ask you a question. Suppose my environment is not exactly directly exposed to the internet. Is there something, a way or a manner that I can actually get the data up into Azure?
So for both a heavy assessment where you're using a product like Service Map, or whether you're using Migrate, they support proxies, and they also support, in this case, Service Map uses the OMS agent, so it can use an OMS Gateway so that you can be able to provide a single endpoint for that traffic to be able to traverse out to Azure.
So has anybody used that particular gateway or has heard about it before? Okay, good. Any feedback on it? Okay, there you go. It works. Great. Next commercial. It works. All right.
So once you fire up the appliance, After it's added in, it's very simple to set up. We have an accept button. We have to add a set of credentials for the appliance itself. And then it actually starts to walk us through being able to reconnect it up to the Azure Migrate project that you have deployed within Azure. So you'll go through, select your cloud, answer a number of questions, answer, hey, what's my vCenter information, credentials there. And we do for environments that are considered highly secure or have very stringent controls around access and what is required. We have a very good document that walks you through both from an assessment perspective and from a migration perspective the exact permissions that are required within your vCenter environment to be able to enable this. And then, of course, once you've created the project, as you go through the process, it's going to list basically its project ID and a key that's associated with the appliance. You enter that information in to connect everything up. And at that point, we're ready to walk through doing a discovery.
Okay. So one thing that I would say that once you kick this off, what I would probably do is have it start churning. And I probably would give it, maybe 30 days maybe?
So the more information it's able to pull out of vCenter, the better assessment it's going to have. So by default, when you run through the wizard, next, and it does the assessment, its default's 1 day. So its confidence level on what information you're pulling back as far as how utilized my virtual machines are, what kind of a load am I running, it's getting 1 day worth of information. So you may want to change that to a longer period of time and then run the assessment over multiple periods of time to kind of get a good view of everything.
And the importance in that right there is you might actually have some type of batch process or some type of workload that's scheduled around the month. It'll capture that and actually see if the machines actually spike during that workload cycle and process and basically report back. So this is something now you can take back and prepare for when you go into Azure.
So is the result of this assessment, at least part of it, a topology of what you need to build as part of your instance in Azure?
So here's what I would say.
Can you repeat that question?
So one more time.
Is the result of Thank you. Is the result of the assessment, or at least part of it, that it gives you a topology of what your environment needs to look like when it's built in Azure?
So what it does is basically a couple things. It mitigates risk. The first thing it does is it discovers the topology so that as you start to take all of the apps or part of the apps, you know the dependencies and the communication. Also, in addition, it gives you an idea of what the costing would be, because this is where you start to talk about, okay, if I'm going to go to Azure, the first thing that a business owner wants to know is how much is it going to cost me, how hard is it going to go, and what's exactly involved. So these are basically the raw metrics you're trying to pull up right here to build a business case and technical case to actually move it up into Azure. So at this point, there's no surprises. How many of those have you had the what fat burger type of moment? You know what I'm trying to say? So we're trying to minimize the risk right there. And you don't necessarily have to be as super trained like the gentleman brought up right here in Azure. Basically, if you're a project manager or an IT pro, basically one person doing multiple hats, it's designed for you to basically download it, get it, extrapolate the data, and at that point compare the pricing, and then maybe call in your Microsoft specialist or partner and start talking about pricing and how you actually move forward from getting that data and orchestrating an actual project. Okay.
I think the other part to your question is it'd be a combination of both a heavy assessment and a light assessment, because what you're looking at is what do I need to build the environment. The application itself here is specific to being able to take, lift, and shift those particular virtual machines. So it's not going to tell you all about your environment. It's going to tell you about the capability of those machines to migrate themselves, to take those themselves.
And other right size, pretty much.
So in this case, we'll quickly look. It identified the machines. In fact, if you go back and look at the previous screen there at the overview, it's kind of hard to see on the screen. On the far right, we have our confidence rating. In this case, I said, give me the maximum amount of time. So its confidence rating is higher, that it's been able to look at the workload, all the metrics that came out of vCenter, and said, I know what kind of a workload these machines are running. So we can actually go in and see, at this point, what it looks like. How much memory each one has, all that good stuff. So then the next piece of it would be, now that we've discovered it, we now need to look at assessing it. So we can actually look at an assessment here. And like I said, you can run multiple assessments to get a view of your environment over time. And so what the assessment gives you is What's my readiness to move a particular workload? And then you can actually drill down into each one and figure out, okay, which ones do I need to mitigate things with? So, for example, there are certain machines, if they're not patched at a right level, or if they don't have, when you move to Azure, you basically, if it's a Linux machine, you either need access to SSH into it, or I'm going to need console access to something. I'm going to need to be able to RDP. So if some of those things aren't enabled, it's going to tell you, hey, you may need to tweak some of these things before you migrate them, otherwise they may be inaccessible.
The other thing also I'd like to say, there's actually a export download portion right there where you can download this data in a spreadsheet, CSV, Excel format. So guess what? It's already a presentation that basically your leadership can actually look at, consume, and review in a logical manner. So guess what? All that work was done. Yes, sir? If you wanted to.
Is there a connection?
You would have to download the actual raw file right there and actually then connect it to it if you want that point.
What was the question?
The question was, can you actually take that assessment when you download it and put it into Power BI? The whole point was, as long as I point the Power BI report to that raw file, I can then get that metrics right there.
And then, of course, the other piece to this is, as you can see, it's doing the cost estimate based upon what the VMs are running and what the expected workload would be migrated to in the cloud.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. All right. So it looks like this is for VMware environments, and that's probably 90% of people's workloads. But what about if they still have physical machines that are maybe running database servers or?
So the question basically is, what happens if I don't have VMware in-house physical?
Right.
So
and
in
like
that,
third-party hypervisor.
okay.
Or other hypervisors.
Sure. So one of the things that we're looking to do with Azure Migrate is that we're looking to put APIs and hooks for third parties for those situations, like if you have OpenStack or KVS. Now, the other thing also, if you have a physical machine, Azure Site Recovery, ASR, when you do your assessment, you can actually point at it and it will see it, look at the machine, and then figure out what's the kind of workload that that machine will look like once we capture it and virtualize and push it up to Azure. Okay, how much time do we have left?
About that much.
Past time. Oh, wow. Minute or two. Jeff, wrap up.
All right, we will wrap up quickly here.
How much time do you have?
Let's see here. Hold on.
We'll take it.
Okay, so we walked through the assessment overview, talked about service map, talked about the, we walked through the assessment, so we're basically down to the migration itself. And so the migration, as we mentioned, there's multiple tools that are out there. The easiest one, if nobody's done a migration, is Azure Site Recovery. Azure Site Recovery is a tool that's designed for, it's basically designed for disaster recovery, migration. It does multiple things. And people are going, well, how would I use it to migrate to the cloud? Well, in many cases, I'm using it to provide backups, or the ability to do failover. So in the case of a migration, it's just a failover to Azure without failing back. So from a tool perspective, it's just as easy as the wizard we walked through to be able to do the setup of the assessment, to be able to migrate a virtual machine that happens to be running in a VMware environment. The only piece to this is it actually does require a component that does get installed on the virtual machine that handles the replication of the data that goes up to Azure.
Jeff, I got a question. Suppose my data center has very bad bandwidth, about 15 megs or 20 megs, and I can't use Azure Site Recovery. What would you then default to?
So there are a couple of different options. We have encrypted products like Azure Databox, which allow you to be able to do an offline migration to it. There are tools like Databox Edge, which allow bandwidth throttling and control of the data so that I could actually export a virtual machine and let it migrate over the wire up to Azure, so I could optimize it for after-hours bandwidth, but then throttle it down so that during your business hours, it doesn't impact your business. So there's a couple of different options out there. So whether it's an online or an offline migration, it all depends on what the bandwidth happens to be, latency, a number of other things.
So just letting you know, we have basically Azure Databox, so he mentions out of the box, the small one does basically about 80 terabytes, and it comes with an SFP, 10 gigs native. We also have the Azure Box Heavy, 40 terabytes on a connection speed. A lot of data goes on that right there. And we also have something called Azure Databox Disks, where we ship to you 5 SSD drives that you can basically use to upload your content, VMs, databases, or content, ship it to us to the data center. we load it, we don't look at your data, and at that point it uploads it to a storage account, and then you could basically manipulate that content and put it into production.
So we'll quickly just walk through. Basically, this was the little wizard to run through to connect to my ESX environment, and then to actually jump out and connect to Azure. So in our environment, I went ahead and kicked off a migrate.
Okay.
Into the dashboard. And here's roughly what it looks like. Again, the console's designed to be able to do multiple things. In our case, we were looking for replicated items. So in this case, I have a web server that I replicated out, and then it gives you the option to be able to figure out if I want to do a failover, test a failover, disable replication, etc. So the advantage to this is if you go to do a migration, you can do a test. If the test does not go well, you can roll the test right back, make corrections, roll it back. And from a migration perspective, your migration is complete when you've actually decided I'm done, and at that point, it's in Azure.
So what Jeff mentioned right here, I think is probably the most important thing that differentiates Azure Site Recovery. It actually creates what we call a bubble. So how many of you actually ever done a full DR test? Let's be honest, a full DR test. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the point is that what this does is, as you have your systems live, it actually brings up your systems in parallel, but in a bubble network that doesn't talk to anything. The live systems don't even know that they're there, and basically you can go inside, test, and evaluate. You can do basically a DR test if you wanted to on a quarterly basis or monthly basis to satisfy the ISO. Basically, it would be putting it within a bubble network that does not have connectivity outside of that bubble network. Okay?
So we have a number of resources for all the things that we've covered. After the talk, we can show anybody who wants to take a look at the actual migration process, stepping through that, or actually replicating one of the VMs over.
Okay.
And that's all we have.
So, question, did you guys find this fun, boring? Just another two guys here? What's up? I mean, smile. I see you smiling. Come on, let's go. There you go. I got a thump.
Yeah, it's good for people just starting the process.
Yes.
But I think it's excellent for people just starting, but it's nice to have it.
So, exactly. What he just said just now basically is the tip of, basically he just quantified it. I should take you on a tour. So basically, a lot of people want to go to the cloud, they just don't know how to do it, and they don't know how to orchestrate it. And this is basically gives you the building blocks to actually start looking at the numbers and the data to figure out what exactly is this going to take. What do I need to know to take to my partners?
The problem is you give them the building blocks, if they're all by numbers, they don't have paint, so that's why the training comes to key. Otherwise, you're going to have a house architect plan, electrician, plumber.
Sure. So we're going to be working pretty soon, probably on some training programs, but I definitely take that right there. And was it Mike?
Yes.
We're definitely going to talk to you after this meeting, okay? All right, any other questions? Everybody happy? Can you guys give me a round of applause? Thank you very much. We love you, Crystal City.